All right, we like to get started on time around here. Okay, so some of you guys are familiar with what some of us in the Vegas venture ecosystem are up to behind the scenes and beyond, because it's definitely not just a Vegas effort, although Vegas is going to get a lot of the credit and the love for it. So as you may have heard from the past Who's Got My Money sessions, or for those of you that attend the online sessions, whether it's Pitch Kung Fu or the fundraising fluency sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you know that our main goal is for founders, whether it's through the lens of a small business, which is possible, or through the lens of a startup, to create as many founder funders as possible. That's our North Star, founder funders. What is a founder funder? A founder that's exited their company or it brings in a private equity partnership and now has quite a bit of cash to do two things. They get to decide, am I going to do this again, which they often do, or am I going to invest in the next batch, the next wave of innovation and innovative founders? So that's the real focus of all the ecosystem stuff that we're building, whether on the capital technology side, whether with all the community, with the venture house properties and the content studio on the Strip, all the communities for small business, for founders and for family offices that we have, and even for the content machine that we're building. Okay? So just kind of keep that as part of the context. Also, how many of you guys could tell me what, makes you really, really, really fundable? What's, like, if you had to boil it down to one thing, what is the largest determining factor in you being fundable? I knew nobody would get it.
The team.
Keep going. Team's closer. Traction, okay. Let's go further, because the answer is the same for this next question. What is the single most valuable thing in the entire venture?
Cute dog.
What is the cute dog for the dog lovers out there? What is the single most important factor, ingredient, resource, the source?
You.
The founder. The founder. So I want you to keep this in mind as we're breaking this subject down today, the difference between if you're fundable, if you're backable, and if you're bankable, always goes back to one thing, and that is the founder or the founders. Nothing is more important than that. Always keep that in mind. The capital's not more important than that. The business model's not more important than that. There is no startup if there is no pilot. So let's just use one more example to really drive this home. How many of you guys remember the shuttles that NASA used to launch off when we were all kids? Looked like a plane, right? Black and white, right? What else did the shuttle have when it took off? It had two other major things. It had booster rockets, right? Big, long, white things. Those were the rockets, right? And it had fuel, which looked like what? Big orange thing that it was strapped to. And it was so big, it was bigger than the booster rockets and the shuttle all at the same time. You guys ever thought about how this works? So when the shuttle takes off, it gets to what? The atmosphere, where it starts to break out of the atmosphere, and what falls away? The booster rockets fall back to Earth, ideally, and the fuel tank, the big orange thing that's 3 times bigger than the shuttle itself, falls in the atmosphere and often would burn up. That's the reason they stopped bothering to paint it. That's the reason it's that rust color, okay? This is the same thing that happens with you as a founder, as you're building your startup. You are the pilot. You're the astronaut. There is no space mission if there is no founder, okay? You're the pilot. The boosters, in this case, I guess, could be the vehicle. And the shuttle is the vehicle, right? The vehicle is your startup. Really, really great founders can get in another shuttle and do it again and go and have another successful mission, because the pilot is really what matters. And then the third thing is the gas tank, right? The gas tank is the resources, the major one being capital, which we define as dollar capital, which is the dollars that come in, whether it's through clients and revenue, if you're a small business, or if you're a venture, right? Also, you've got sales capital or client capital. This is the clients and the customers that make the business successful, right? And then third is the human capital. This is the team that makes everything possible. I think it's That with the founder is probably the single most important ingredient. And as you guys look very closely at the stories of these companies that have become billion-dollar companies, the teams are championship teams. The competition to hire the best in the world at what they do is incredibly fierce. I got an inside look into JP Morgan Chase and how much money they've been spending on recruiting. It's insane, the money that they spend on recruiting, because they understand how valuable human capital is in a business. It's absolutely the most critical thing. So with Fusion, which is the fundraising community we have, where we do these sessions, and we've got this 24/7, what is a WhatsApp group with 1,000 founders in it, soon to be Telegram, the idea is to fuse the pilots and the teams together with the right capital and the right resources they need to make that journey. I'm gonna go back to one more thing. Remember, guys, that gigantic gas tank and booster rockets, it falls away at the atmosphere, right as it starts to leave into space. And of course the shuttle has its own little thrusters on it, right? But those thrusters are enough to move it around in space, but it needs all of that fuel, all of those gigantic booster rockets to get it to break free of the atmosphere. There could not be a better metaphor for what it's like to build a venture. And the amount of time and energy it takes to go from 0 to 1. What it takes to really get initial traction. Okay? So in talking about if you're fundable, if you're backable, if you're bankable, we want to kind of take a little departure real quick, and we want to talk about the differences between small businesses and startups. And I wanted to say this, small businesses outnumber startups 100 to 1 in the United States. It's probably 200 to 1. They provide a critical part of the economy. They're half of our economy in the United States. So even though we get excited about startups, and that's what we're here to talk about, there's no shame in building a small business. Small businesses can be more efficient. They're often more profitable. They're way less stressful. And so one of the things Sammy and I are going to break down, you guys know Sammy. Sammy Spreadsheets and I are going to break down, before we really dig into what we believe makes you fundable. And it's going to be a bit of a tidal wave, so I hope you guys are ready to kind of take some notes, because we're going to move really fast. We're going to talk about the difference between how you know if you're a small business and how you know if you're a startup. You got some things you're kicking in your head you want to start with?
Yeah. We're going to do an exercise. You guys know me by now, right? We interact on everything. Can you raise your hand if you think you are a startup founder? Yeah, look at that. So many people, almost like double digits. All right. Let's do, how do we want to do this? I really believe in word precision. So what I'm going to do is, traditionally, I use the term startup founder. I'm going to redefine startup for a moment and say, if you are starting a business, you are in a startup. Regardless of whether that is a small business or a venture scalable startup. So now, if I redefine this and say, raise your hand if you believe what you're building is venture scalable. Please raise your hand. Oh, we love that. We're going to redefine that one as well. Please raise your hand if you have revenue right now. Cool. Those of you who have revenue can qualify for a small business. Those of you who are truly venture scalable, and we'll dive into that, can qualify as a traditional venture scalable startup. Those of you who have neither of those two things, and again, we'll dive into it, are in trouble. If you're not venture scalable and you're not bringing in revenue, you're not going to get investment, because there are other people who are out there who have different competitive advantages. So raise your hand if you have gotten funding without getting any revenue. Cool. Those items require that you have some sort of competitive advantage, that there's some sort of innovation or idea that somebody else goes, oh, wait a second, I don't have what you have. Please take my money so that you can go make money that I can't make because you have some sort of advantage I can't get. Does that sound right? Cool. So then what happens to the rest of us? What makes something truly venture scalable? I'm going to ask you guys about a business that's very, very well known today. They have a lot of money, and I don't believe they're venture scalable, although they have probably invested in multiple ventures since then. Does anyone raise your hand if you know of Blue Ribbon Sports? This was established in 1964, and they changed their name in 1971. It's a very, very big company, but they started as a small business. And today, people would be like, if they want to call themselves a venture, they can call themselves a venture. If they want to call themselves a small business, well, they're not small anymore.
Just do it.
It's Nike. It's not shameful to run a business for 7 years under a different name, making a lot of money and getting the revenue that you need to be able to afford the type of rebrand that makes someone go, just do it 40 years later, 50 years later now. So let's try this. I would like for those of you who believe you have a venture scalable business to give me one metric or one competitive advantage, just one sentence, and we're gonna tell you if we think that single sentence, only that's the only context we get. We're not gonna judge based on anything else that we know, even though we know a lot of you guys quite well. We're gonna judge just solely based off of that, because in a 30-second elevator pitch, is that the sentence that you should say to an investor to make them believe that you are worth investing in without traction? Your metric might be around traction. Some people's competitive advantage is that they know their market already, that they already proved that they can go get a customer who hasn't bought from anybody else to buy from them. That's a fair competitive advantage. Feel free to use metrics in that space. Your metric might be, here's how many patents we have that make it very difficult for anyone to replicate us. So if you can raise your hand if you'd like to participate in this game, let's go get some venture scalable businesses to show us why they don't need revenue today to go get funding.
Quickly, come line up down here. We only have time for a few. Quickly. This is your moment. Okay, Lee, you're up first. Come over here. Come get in the.
I don't want to be first.
Oh, come on. Somebody's always got to be first.
One sentence.
One sentence. Very quick.
Convergence of four dimensions can remove customer acquisition costs from the consumer game market.
So I'm going to have you go again specifically because that sentence tells me what your product is. It doesn't tell me why you have a competitive advantage that
No one else has ever figured out how to remove customer acquisition costs from consumer games. That is the majority of their business. Like 99.5% of their budget goes towards customer.
Okay, you have to respond just to that, and we have to move on.
Yeah. So.
What do you think?
it's a no because you didn't give me how. It's got.
You didn't say how. You said what's our competitive advantage. Why would I tell my competitive advantage how to do it?
Because it's very possible. You need to give enough for me to be able to say.
Understood.
You need to be able to give enough for me to say, oh, I need to talk to
Andrew
this guy
went
more.
first. Props. Okay.
All right, no.
Our access control system provides the same features as existing access control systems and can be installed for between 1/3 and 1/2 the cost.
I want to know more. That's a tell me more. Next.
Good job.
Tell me more is what we're going for.
It's only one sentence. All we're trying for is tell me more.
We are an ESG food-based competitive game that has Web3 and blockchain, and there's nothing out there like it. We're like Roblox on crack.
Ooh.
You like crack, Sammy?
My problem is too many buzzwords.
Yeah. So because I know you, I would say tell me more because I know who you are as a founder. But if I didn't, meh.
I'm trying to judge just based on the sentence, and there's just too many buzzwords for me to really know what you're talking about. So it's hard for me to go, this is genuinely different.
Cool. So what you guys can do is you can send a message in the WhatsApp to improve this. Keep coming, please.
We did not say this was going to be easy.
Yeah.
If you have an EV and you have range anxiety, I can solve your problem
I do.
by building EV charging stations along highways in half the time that others do.
Did you need to mention cost?
No, but I'm confused. You're building charging stations? Charging stations?
Yes.
And you're building them more quickly than other people can build charging stations.
Yes.
What about cost?
Same cost.
It
Okay.
doesn't read as venture scalable to me. It reads as
Do you
small
have the
business.
capitalization for that?
For the first project, yes.
Okay, interesting. Let's keep moving. It's good practice, guys. Okay.
I'll come back to that one later.
I am going to replace your needed 2 to 6 hours at the gyms each week with 2 15-minute sessions, and you're not even going to sweat.
Tell me more.
Yeah, venture scalable. Venture scalable.
Okay. Do you want to make it? comment to before I?
Yeah, the last two. What was your name? The EV charging station? Martin?
Yeah.
Martin? Okay, I feel like that one is exactly the cusp of small business versus startup. So that's where I'm going to go. Because the difference between it being venture scalable is saying, I figured out how to turn $1 into 100. Please give me $1 so I can just print these really quickly. I need you to accelerate me with your money. Versus a small business is saying, I'm starting this out. I'm still figuring this out. Some of the best startups are the ones who go, well, this is my second business. I'm taking the competitive advantage I have from my first business where I've already acquired this many businesses. So that's my distribution channel. I already have distribution figured out. I have 10,000 customers that are currently using this platform, and I'm going to roll this out to those customers when I build this new product. I need your money to go build the product. And they go, well, it sounds like this is a great venture that's very scalable, that I give you, for every $1 I give you, you will give me 100. Venture scalable is a 100x growth. It is not the right way for every business to build. And oftentimes, a lot of startup founders are going to have to be a small business first because their competitive advantage involves de-risking and proving that they're capable of doing something because they don't already have a competitive advantage, distributor or strategic partner that says, we've got distribution locked down for you.
How many of you guys understand that when you take venture capital, you're choosing a business model box to operate inside of? You're choosing to take money from someone that's not a single check writer, most likely is representing other people's funds. And I say, I've been a VC myself, so it's not like, we're essentially brokering other people's capital, unless you're like my firm where we were actually mostly our capital, right? Usually they go out as a general partner and they raise money from limited partners. And so they have a 10-year time horizon, but 5 to 6 year window, they're gonna invest the majority of that capital. So they have a business model and a fiduciary responsibility to return that capital. This is not somebody that's a founder funder like a family office that exited for $1 billion and can choose to take 15 years because they really believe in what you're doing. So understand you're choosing a business model. We're gonna back up real quick. This is not an exhaustive list, but the Fusion community, Derek, Manesh, AJ, Sammy, Lori, Bay, we all threw together a list. Some of these individuals couldn't be here. So these are some of the things that define a small business versus a startup. And again, there's nothing wrong with being one or the other. It's just understanding like what you're doing, and you know, they operate very differently. The number one thing on here I say is speed. Startups move at the speed of light. Small businesses can be more paced. Small business tends to think in years and consistency, and startups think in weeks and months because they die if they do not operate and move that fast. Startups innovate or they die, and they will never raise if they don't have an enormous value prop. In general. If you find a strategic investor that truly understands what you're doing, then it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but in general the value prop has to be pretty massive. Founders need to be prepared. This is super critical and very, very important, guys. This one is like the thing that gets overlooked the most, and we're going to be spending some more time on this later. Founders need to be prepared to dramatically level up their way of being because their venture requires learning every single day. Startups require a level of learning that small business does not. I'm not saying you don't learn in small business, but small business, like, you've got more time. The level of stress, the amount of resources is just a completely different thing. So building a small biz is stressful enough. I would say startups is 5 to 10 times the stress because the speed at which you have to, if you raise, you've got 18 months. And often you find out that the money you raise doesn't last 18 months. You're at month 11 saying, holy crap. And do you know how many, you guys know how many companies die in between rounds? You know how often that happens? Okay, just to get through this list real quick. 98% of small businesses never raise capital. They don't take on loans. I would know. I've been a startup lender for 20 years. They don't take on loans. Startups move so fast at some point. If you truly want to scale, you will need to raise capital somehow, some way. And most likely, it will not be from a bank, which we'll get into later. Banks don't understand your business. This is a Sammy one. I'm going to let her cover it in a second, 6%. And then small businesses offer an incremental increase in value to their customers most of the time, and that's totally okay. Whereas a startup must offer a paradigm shift in value in order to scale. 6%.
how do I want to do 6%? Let's try it this way. Someone raise your hand if you're raising money right now. What amount?
Between 1 and 1.4 million.
1 and 1, let's call it 1 and 1.5 million. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that by 100, and we're going to say he's looking for venture capital money. If it's not true, we'll come back to that. So 1 would become 100, 1.5 would become 150 million. Can you tell me in like 1 or 2 sentences what your go-to-market strategy is in the next 5 to 7 years that would justify a $150 million valuation at the end of it?
Oh, sure. 14 years ago, I built a medical device that set the standard for premature baby care in a hospital. So it's a camera system.
Okay.
Imagine FaceTime that's HIPAA compliant. That was only for the family bonding experience. We were acquired 5 years ago, and now they're letting it kind of down the vine. So I'm recreating it, but also adding a clinical element that is AI driven.
Cool.
So imagine nurses can only be at a bed space for a couple minutes a day, or a couple minutes per shift per hour. This is something that could be at the bed space 24/7.
I love the competitive advantage of having already done this once before. What's your price point?
So the price point is about $2,500 per bed space. So an average hospital will usually be a $100,000 purchase and a 20% support contract. So
Cool.
$20K on top of it.
So Sammy's spreadsheets built a little model in her mind. She's saying the average contract is about 100K. Your job is to go get the first few contracts so people are like, oh yes, this does work in this new space compared to the past one that you were working in. And do I believe he can be 150 million in 5 years? Yeah, absolutely. At 100K per contract, that seems pretty reasonable. Hospitals also stack and scale. Once you get the first few reputation ones, the later ones are easy. So this is actually a very venture scalable startup and something that's easy for him to justify. He also raised his hand for raise your hand if you raise money without any revenue, because it's a strong ideation and competitive advantage.
And he's done it before.
Yeah.
Yes. So 6% versus 10%. Do you have revenue today?
No.
Oh, okay. So I love doing this with pre-revenue companies because you can set your next 30, 60, 90 days to be the aggressive growth that you need. Pick a number, like 1. 1 hospital sold in the first month would get you 100K on average. Then your goal is to grow. Traditionally, this is going to be not a 100K one client setup. Let's assume for a second that it's 100K for some number of licenses, and that we're really counting the number of licenses. Let's say that it's 100 licenses because I want an even number.
50. So we sell 50 cameras per hospital. That comes out to $100,000.
Fantastic. 50 is good enough for me. 50 times 6% is 3. So in the second month, if he gets 53 licenses sold, he's on track to grow 6% each month. He does that again the next month after that, coming out to somewhere around 57 new licenses sold. And someone's going to go, wait a second, this is a great idea. It's a startup that's growing, and they're growing at the rate of 6% per month. When you compound that over 12 months, it will be a 100% growth or 2x revenue by the end of the year. If you're an early stage startup, we're talking about selling the first hospital. You actually want to target 3x growth, 10% month over month. So first month, I sell 50. Second month, I sell 55. The month after that, I'm looking for 60, 61-ish. If I hit those for 3 months and an investor looks at me and goes, you only sold 61 licenses? Yes, but I've only been doing this for 3 months and I've been growing 10% month over month. You want to jump on the train now or you want to miss out?
Do you see how sellable that is? Do you see how you're going to have investors throwing money at you even if they don't understand? Because it's math. It's traction based on math. It's so far away from like a maybe. It's like you will have multiple suitors saying, I'm interested, because it's easy to just show the math. And math is something that most investors get pretty quick. It's pretty simple business math, actually. You don't have to understand algebra or geometry for this.
So the other half of that, and we'll come back to the venture capital element, is they have a fiduciary duty. What that means is if they invest in you and you go broke, they pull up the financial models that you use to justify the investment in them and say, but their numbers look like this. There's no way we could have known that Google was going to launch a competing product. So we're not wrong and we didn't break fiduciary duty. If my financial model shows some level of risk, they're like, dude, what were you thinking? You can't be a general partner if you're making investments with other people's money like this. You had a fiduciary duty to protect these people. You cannot be an investor anymore. So if it's their job and their reputation, and literally they wouldn't be able to do it anymore if they took one risk that was too risky, what are they going to do? Invest in the person who has 10% month-over-month growth or the person who has no revenue?
All right, we're going to go very, very quick so that we have some time to do some more interactive stuff. So I'm gonna break down stuff that the team in general, a lot of this came from Bay, but it came from the team, determines some things that make you not fundable. And guys, just so you know, you're not off the hook just because you're a small business for any of this stuff. You have to do the same stuff in your small business that you have to do in a startup. It's just the stakes are higher. That's really what it is. The level of innovation, it's just a bunch of extra. It's just everything turned up to 11. Okay, so I'm gonna burn through this real quick. And remember, the context is this. You are the X factor in your venture. That is what will make or break your ability to be fundable. You will see how it's critical in bankable in being backable, and you'll see how it's pretty dang likely to be a deciding factor in you being bankable as well. So no matter what this cute little list is, you decide whether or not your venture is successful. Some of you guys know that we're building a funding platform to automate the fundraising process. It has been quite the journey as a funder myself, to go and talk to all the different capital types, all the different people that write checks, and to ask them how money moves, all the creativity under which they choose to do transactions, and to figure out what are the patterns. How do you automate that? How does that turn, what are the patterns that can be duplicated, even just word to mouth if I explain it to a founder, so that they understand capital stack, which is the different capital types and the different capital partners they put into their venture at one time, and how they do capital sequence, which is what are the relationships and resources I need over time, right? So these are things most founders don't understand and they can't explain. They certainly couldn't explain to me capital categories, which we go over very often, in the sessions. Just for quick, we'll go over them again. The first is public and gov funds. That's your first bucket. Anything that started as taxpayer money. Number 2 is debt. There's 100 different types of debt broken into 4 categories. Number 3 is equity. This is what most of you guys think about when you're a venture and you're trying to give money, you're trying to get money from somebody in exchange for shares in your company. And number 4 is what we call raised revenue, also sponsored capital. This is when an independent check writer decides to write you a check and it's not tied to equity or interest. And this is a very real capital category, I should say, right? Where somebody says, oh, we have an aligned interest. It's not about the interest in your business. It's not about the equity that I want. That's not what I'm after. I'm after the aligned outcome that you can produce, right? So the main 3 check writers in that category, since I'm going to get questions from all of you guys, and I write about this stuff every day on my LinkedIn, and so does my partner Derek Watson, is family offices, private equity groups, and the Fortune 2000. Every single one of them has money set aside to do ventures. Every single one of them. The Fortune 2000, all of the Fortune 2000s are funding startups. Yes, I said it out loud. They're doing it quietly behind the scenes. And it's up to you to do the capital discovery process to understand what it is that they want. And it is never the same thing. It always comes down to the individual check writer's passions and impacts that they care about if they're living in the legacy stage of their life, or the corporation's corporate interest, where they're headed. They're like a gigantic battleship. They cannot turn quickly. They're not nimble like a startup. So sometimes they're like, I'm going to try this little project with these guys. Here's $3 million. It happens all the time. I've watched MasterCard do it, etc. over and over. I'm going to say one thing before we get into this list, guys. In building a funding platform, this is how crazy this is. Do you want to know what I think the number 1 reason founders are not successful? The founder. And this never occurs to a founder that they're the problem. They're the reason why the leads to the investor didn't work. They're the reason why they didn't get the timing right in the market and didn't do their homework. They're the reason why they haven't taken the time to understand how to be a fundraising fluent founder and know when to play which capital card. And here's what's amazing about taking total responsibility of this. You're in control. It means that you are the creator. Instead of everything else is basically acting on you, you're acting upon the universe instead. This is a much more powerful frame to operate from, and when a funder sees and feels this energy, it changes the way that they respect you. It changes the way that they look at you. It changes the way they feel about you. Okay? So that's more important than anything I'm about to mention on this list, is that you see yourself as the problem, but you're also the solution. That's the important part, to be really positive about it. All right, The problem to solve isn't big enough or urgent enough. It's painkiller versus a vitamin. Painkillers are more successful. How do we know that? Because we've got the pharmaceutical industry that doesn't care about wellness. They care about the sickness business. That's the business they're in. Haven't identified a compelling ICP that's big enough, scalable, targetable, and has enough willingness to pay. ICP is your ideal customer profile. Do they have money? Do they have pain? Can I solve it? Can I do it now? Am I the right team? Do I have the right solution? Right? Those are things that go into your ICP. Haven't done enough customer validations, which we call hallucinations versus reality. The wait list, the direct feedback, initial signups, product engagement, your GTC. Been talking about this for years, your go-to community strategy. Founders, you cannot skip the middle. We as investors can smell it when you haven't talked to 100 clients. We know that you haven't gotten the objections. When you're being hit with something the first time from one of us that should have been covered 1,000 times over by your founder. And this is the reason why we teach people these first 100 client conversations. They're critical. Critical, right? You cannot skip that. And yes, you do that before you go and try to raise. You do that before you build a product. I know that's crazy because founders love their products so much. First time founders focus on product, second time founders build a great product, but they focus on distribution. Second time founders focus on distribution. All right, the product value prop positioning isn't clear. Positioning. Is the rocket shuttle we talked about at the beginning of the session taking off from Cape Canaveral, or is it leaving from somewhere else? Does that change the atmosphere? Are the wind conditions different? Oh yeah, right? Does this change the mathematical calculations, right? What's going on with the weather? What's going on with the timing? What's the atmospheric pressure? These things matter when you're trying to launch a rocket at 1,000 miles per second, right? Think about that, the positioning. Many of you guys don't have your positioning right, which sometimes is your messaging. Haven't found one channel that can create enough traction, and it doesn't even need to be scalable. And if you're confused about this, one of the things that Sammy specializes in is helping you find traction that you already have or that you can easily get to, pre-funding. It's one of the things she's great at. Lack of understanding of the market dynamics and competitor landscape. Do not come on Pitch Kung Fu and tell us you don't have any competition. It's never true. I love it when a founder's like honest about, yeah, I'm paranoid about these other guys, but here's my plan, right? Or they say something like, we don't have a real competitor, because there's a difference between real competitors and perception competitors. The real competitors are someone trying to build something that is competitive what you're doing, or they already have it, and you're the one trying to unseat them. But the perception is more important. It's your user, the person that's going to use your product. What do they think are your competitors? Because that's who you've got to sell. What are they using instead of your service or your product? That's who you should be most worried about. And as we like to say, if it's an Excel spreadsheet, you're in trouble because that's free and everybody's got them. So something to think about. Lack of understanding of market dynamics, I already said that. Lack of understanding of the financials and unit economics. This is where Sammy loves to help make these numbers very simple, very, very clear for you guys. Not a serial entrepreneur. This is not required. This is absolutely not required. But does it make a difference? Oh yeah, even if they were failures, it makes a difference. Especially if you're building something in the same industry, or where the last experience, you got your lashes, you got your cuts and your bruises, and you now know what to look for. You've had to hire before, you've had to fire before, you understand how to not overspend. These kinds of things are very important. Lack of a credible team. Team matters. So guys, one of the things I learned as a VC is every time I give somebody money, they're gonna have struggles with three things: their dollar capital, their sales and their client capital, and their human capital. Their sales and their client capital means marketing and your ability to acquire users. No amount of money will fix your inability to know how to sell and to acquire users. We did a session 2 weeks ago, 0 to 1. One of my buddies from college has become an expert in launching companies and getting them to 8 figures immediately. That's his thing. He loves that. That whole we're going to take the rocket ship to the atmosphere. The really hard part of the journey, he's sick in the mind. He loves that kind of stuff. This is what Steve thrives on, right? He says, I never build a product ever, if I can't sell it first. If I can't sell it first. And a lot of you guys have never validated that. Many of you are product experts and you're too scared to actually go out and sell. We can tell. You're too scared to pitch. And you're never going to be successful in pitching to investors if you can't go out and sell first. It's one of the things that's really important. And then last but not least, you have not translated your why to commercial Viability. So think of it, your why is more an emotional thing. The how is where the logic comes in. The why is the emotion of why you're doing it and why this needs to be solved. But the how is the logic. It's the plan. It's the this is how we do this. And both are really important when you're talking about fundability. Your why is more important when it comes to backability than your how, but that's a different topic. Okay, we're gonna move on. I'm gonna burn through a bunch of things. This was all like GTM, go-to-market talk, okay? And if you're wondering why we spend so much time on GTM, is because most of you guys struggle with go-to-market more than anything else, and it's the work you need to do, the homework you need to do before you actually go and pitch. Now we're gonna get into some fundability stuff that has to do with fundraising. All right. You have not taken the time to become fundraising fluent or learn how the game of capital is played. You want to wait till you're desperate for the next round or until it's too late. This is one of the most annoying things to me when people come to me for help and they haven't read the LinkedIn. They haven't shown up in the sessions. They come only for the pitch events. I know exactly what's going on. You guys think that pitching is what makes you fundable. It's not.
Can we try that really quickly?
It's the Tuesday sessions that make you fundable.
Can we try that really quickly?
Yeah, very quick.
Can you raise your hand if you think you need 3 months to fundraise? Can you raise your hand if you think you need 6 months to fundraise?
At least.
Can you raise your hand if you think you need 9 months to fundraise? Can you raise your hand if you think you need 12 months to fundraise?
And who thinks all of these answers are wrong? And want to know why they're wrong? Because 12 is the closest answer. You are always, always, always fundraising. I use this example a lot, but name any big company you want, they were fundraising for 10 years straight. It didn't end, didn't stop, always. Always to the next round, always the relationship with the funder now, maybe they fund you year 4.
We have different favorite capital types, so I'm just going to talk about that really quickly. If my favorite capital type is revenue, I'm making an 18-month raise to give myself 6 months where I genuinely don't have to think about raising that much. Because for 6 months, I'm trying to raise for my customer. But if I get 18 months of runway, which is maybe more than $1 million, just to buy myself 6 months of dedicated time, how quickly do I need to be moving? Raise your hand if you haven't gotten fundraising in the last 6 months. Don't raise your hand. You don't have to say that.
Oh, actually, it's cool.
But if you're sitting there and feeling that, you're like, I haven't made enough traction in 6 months to justify someone giving me 18 months of money so I can focus for just 6 months before I need to start preparing for my next raise. If you don't win your customer over, if you don't make your capital come from revenue in the first 6 months, you're going back into the fundraising game. So if you ask yourself, are you going to raise again? That's the real question. Are you going to get enough capital from your customers in the first 6 months after your raise?
Here's what's cool about what she just said. Small businesses don't exist without clients and customers. It's like so simple. You know, startups like to forget that, but you know, they have to deal with gravity as well, right? Okay. This is also important. You can't name more than 3 different capital types and are not aware of the 4 major capital categories that break down to 60 different distinct types of capital. Why is this important? Most of you guys are trying to go after capital that may or may not be a fit for you, whether you're a small business or you're a venture. We understand this stuff is confusing. That's the reason why we teach this stuff for free. We understand that you are falling out of an airplane, building a parachute, and now you're being asked from the fundraising side of things to learn Swahili or Japanese. We know it's hard. We know it's confusing. But guess what, guys? It's one of the 3 capital like macros that go into your business is the dollar capital side. Who in your business is going to learn it? I don't understand why more VCs don't get annoyed by this. Part of it is because they don't know the answers either. They don't know about the different capital types. It's insane. I would get really frustrated though, and I do now because I recognize if you don't learn it now and I give you a check, in 18 months you're going to be coming back to me saying, I don't know what to do. Super, super important. The capital part, more than anything else, is the rocket fuel. But it isn't going to replace you as a founder looking at yourself asking, how am I showing up? Can I recruit? Do I know how to sell and get clients and customers? So these things are super important. All right, this is actually a link in this Google Doc because I get asked for this all the time. You think it's appropriate to meet an investor or connector to investment and immediately ask the investor for referrals. We don't know who the hell you are or whether or not you're fundable. So how to win friends and influence people? Like, it's basic relationshiping. An AI is not deciding to fund you. A human being is deciding to fund you. It's emotion, it's FOMO, it's a bunch of stuff that it probably shouldn't be, which is the reason why we're working to create a data-driven approach. Not what VCs say they're going to do, but what they're actually been doing and what they're actually funding. And we're tracking all of it. All of it. Because it's not transparent to founders. And we understand that that's sucky. But don't be a moron. Would you show up at somebody's house and say, I'm just going to hang out in the pool, and by the way, you got the keys to your car? You know, hey, it's cool. You know? Oh, by the way, can I borrow your debit card? When you get to the point where you can write very large checks, the most important thing in your life, other than your family and your health, is the relationships in your life. And if you think somebody's going to cough those up to you when you have not proven that you are the type of founder that they should bet on, guys, it's human nature. Every investor's thinking, will this person embarrass me? Will they make me look bad? I know, it sounds really unsophisticated for investors to think that way. It is how we think. Most VCs, they don't want to hear from you unless you came from a warm referral. Even if you know that you can get to a VC, it's better if you can find a way in through somebody that's going to endorse you. It's going to say, hey, I believe in this founder. So I have a whole post dedicated to investor referrals and when to ask for them. Because this is one way you rub yourself the wrong way with people. You think that pitching brings you closer to being funded when you are not prepared. Guys, I'm a crazy mountain biker. I go out there prepared. I wear a full face helmet. I wear knee pads. I have shoes so that my toes don't get destroyed. And I have one hell of a machine that I choose to go out and do battle with the mountain with. I'm prepared. I have tools. And sometimes it's not enough. I still end up having to walk, I break something, I fall off the mountain, I get scars, I get scrapes. But I still try to be prepared because I respect the mountain. I know that if I'm riding on a cliff edge, every once in a while, I'm gonna fall, or the tire's gonna slip, or whatever. So I respect the task at hand. And many of you guys just think it's okay to go into battle without being prepared. This is the reason we do Pitch Kung Fu. This is the reason we have an entire room in the WhatsApp chat devoted to you uploading your 2-minute video pitch so that you can get feedback. So you can get practice, so that when you go in, like, you have the instincts. You know what to say, you've heard it all before, you're fluent when you get stopped or this or that. There's a reason for a 2-minute video pitch, guys. We do this on purpose so that anywhere, anytime, any place, to anyone, you can pitch. And they don't know that they're being pitched if it's in a 30-minute conversation. Okay. You've not spoken to and collected real feedback from at least 100 clients. Isn't this interesting? This showed up in the GTM side, now it's showing in the GTF side, which is your go-to fundraise side. Yeah, we notice on both ends if you haven't done that. You don't know how to sell. It's in caps. Founders have to be able to sell. They have to be able to sell. And you're scared to sell. And by the way, we can smell this. Everybody can smell it when you're scared. You just got to go out and do it. You got to be uncomfortable. You've got to be willing to get over it. It's not, you can't outsource your fundraise to somebody else. You can't outsource your selling to somebody else. You have to do it. The founding team has got to be able to do it. Someone in the team has got to be able to do it. Do not expect somebody else to care about the sales in your company or the fundraising in your company more than you do. Their life is not depending on it. Your goals and dreams are. You need to take it that seriously. You think one investor is going to save you. They won't, and that's not how it works. Almost no business that's venture scalable gets one investor and they take every round. In fact, I can't think of many times that's actually happened. So that means you need to understand capital stack and capital sequence, which means you need to be showing up at the sessions. You won't find books where you can read this stuff. The best books on fundraising aren't about fundraising, they're about history. Where if you can understand the pattern, you can see how one company funded the next company and how it was a daisy chain. That's how I learned this stuff. And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't learn it until I was 15 years in. I really thought I knew. And then I started studying it because I had to build a funding platform. I had to really understand this stuff better than everybody else. I was like, whoa. Okay, you don't understand capital stack or capital sequence. By the way, the reason why sequence is important is it's a marathon. You're going to be doing this for a long time. It's exhausting. Whatever you think it's going to take to fundraise, it takes more time and more energy than you can imagine. It is a full-time job to fundraise. It's the CEO's job to fundraise. And some of the best companies in the world had teams completely devoted to this, where the founders were the ones out there hitting the pavement, and they were very, very focused on this. Okay, you are the main reason for your inability to raise, not the market, not the fancy platform we're building either. You still have to pitch to investors, even when we do pairing and matching to investors. You're the one that has to carry that baton. You don't know what you don't know, but you need to drop the attitude and the entitlement. I don't think most founders are entitled per se, but it's interesting to me that founders don't ever imagine that they're the reason that they're not successful. What a crappy frame to be operating from, where you think everybody else is at fault, or the market's at fault, or this or that. There's people that have come through tremendous adversity off of dirt floors, had no education, and have still been able to build billion-dollar startups. You live in the United States, what's your damn excuse? It's hard, and if you are not ready for how hard it is, don't do it. Go build a small business. Go work for somebody else. There's a reason why this freedom isn't free when it comes to the entrepreneurial freedom that we get to have in building ventures. It's a privilege to be a startup founder. I was on a panel recently at one of the events we threw in LA with some heavy hitting VC groups. And one of the guys leaned over to me and said, "When did founders become a bunch of pussies?" And I said, "You know what? Let's talk about that right as we walk out." And he said, very, very direct, I understand. He said, "Guys, stop with the whining. Stop with the it's hard. Yeah, we know it's hard. You get a chance to take moonshots and fail and get to go do it again. God bless America." And all the other countries look at our country in total awe of the risk we're willing to take. And what we're doing, as much as the system of capital is broken, it is working to a degree, right? And there's unlimited amounts of capital that's out there. That's another thing I need to mention to you guys. You think the numbers are down or this, or people are getting funded every day. You just have to decide, is that going to be me? What am I willing to do to get there to become that? Okay, we're going to transition real quick. These are just a few of the items that we believe you have to be thinking about if you're fundable. Let's take this bar to another level. If fundability is what you're building and the vehicle you're creating, obviously paired with you as the pilot, backable is a different thing. Now, she has kind of her own version of what she thinks backable is. I'm creating backable. I'm saying backable based on what I see in the market with massive checks that are being written to people for no reason, that has nothing to do with this list you just saw. Backability is about not what you're building, but who you are as a founder. Backing is different than funding. Funding is I wrote you a check, good luck, I'm going to help you a little. Backing, it means I'm going to make sure you don't fail. I talk about the game of capital being rigged. For those that the game of capital is rigged for, that know how to play the game, they get backing, not funding. Backing means I'm giving you money, I'm giving you relationships, I'm throwing the kitchen sink at this, I'm calling all my political friends. You guys see the difference? This is like, we're going yard sale on this sucker. We're going to make sure that you make it. Here's the list of things that I think is required for you to be backable. Number one, oh, this theme keeps coming up. Total ownership and accountability for who you are as a human being. How many founders ask me, hey, am I detracting myself from my own opportunity? It doesn't happen. Instead, it's always about the business. Guys, the vehicle, the car, the startup should be changeable. You as a founder are the pilot. Second, energy and enrollment. Now, this is a very special word to me, enrollment. What does it mean? It means that people want to follow you. You're a leader that's so charismatic, you've done the homework, you're working on yourself, you're receiving feedback, you're always open, you're a visionary, but you understand that there's what you don't know, and there's what you don't know that you don't know, and how much bigger that is, right? And so you're constantly moving, you're constantly receiving feedback, but you're the type of person that when you walk in a room, people know you're there and they say, that person has the eye of the tiger, they're going to make it. I better get on board, I better help them out. I better get into my checkbook and write them a check where I don't even care if I get equity or interest in the company. These are the people that get backed. Last, on my list, as far as one of the things I look for is coachability. If you're not coachable, I don't even want to be in the same room as you. I've been doing this for 20 years. I do not know everything. I hope the founder knows a whole lot more about their project than I do, but I understand market dynamics. I understand capital, and I understand human beings, and I understand the challenges they run into because I've had to help them as they break. A VC's job, if they're doing a great job, is they give you the capital, and as things break in the company, they figure it out together as a team. Because my return is banking on these things not being broken forever. Great startups break, and they just keep moving because they solve, they repair at new levels. They're leveling up and they're breaking the crap out of every system in the company as they go through. They're shattering that glass. You cannot get there if you're not coachable. And it doesn't mean that the investors know more than you. They don't. If we didn't need you, what do we got you for? If we can't count on you, right? Last but not least, this is super important for backability. You must have aligned outcomes and goals for the person that's going to write you a check. There is some outcome that they want that they're writing you a check for, because it's not about equity in your company. Most of the time these individuals or these corporations or groups are controlling billions. The equity in your company matters very little to them. They're in the legacy stage of their lives. It's all about, oh wow, this woman is going to be a poster child for more female founders. Oh wow, this is going to be someone that helps this region to be known for more success. Like it's a massive, massive list, as deep as your imagination, why somebody would want to write you a check, because to them it's just money. They can't take it with them, right? Backability is extremely rare. I don't see it very often, but every single time I seem to find a pattern of somebody having the game rigged for them, where it's like, guys, I'll give you an example. Adam Newman from WeWork, horrible founder. Horrible, horrible founder. I don't even know if he's a good human being. He's definitely been backed, because he tried to sink the company multiple times, over and over and over and over. Do you see how powerful that is? That all of a sudden this crazy list just stops mattering because you got somebody that's basically feeding you cash and supporting you and doing all this stuff? I don't think most founders show up this way. I don't think entrepreneurs think this way, where they're that incredibly selfish, but this is a great example.
I'm going to pivot this just by removing one thing. Because the same way that we don't expect to meet a person and have them invest in us immediately and write us a check that day, the same way you wouldn't expect someone to become backable to that extent immediately. So I'm going to remove one item and one item only, and I'm also going to do a slight plug for demo time. They're not writing the check anymore. I just want to make that one mentality shift. Don't look for an investor. Because if you're not backable, you're not backable. Don't look for an investor if someone who isn't writing you a check won't download your app, leave you a review, introduce you to a friend. What makes you think an investor is going to do all that and write a check? Cool. So let's start with my baby version of backability, almost traction and backability. Ask for the smallest of things. Can you get your community to show up for you? Can you get them to subscribe to you on YouTube, Instagram, whatever that it is that you need? These are going to be part of your traction metrics anyways. If they can't show up for you and support you, especially in a community like this one, where so many of us are founders already, and many of us will be founders someday, if you can't give someone else a like or subscribe, knowing that you're going to be in the same position someday, how unmotivating is that founder? So if we sit with that for a moment, my version of backability is very basic. Can you make yourself backable at all? Can you get someone to give you their support, whatever support means for them, instead of limiting yourself to the types of people where money doesn't mean anything to them? Start with people the same way you wouldn't go to the biggest venture capitalist, you wouldn't go to Sequoia, you wouldn't go to the investor that is most aligned with your thesis and most makes sense for your practice round. Go out into your community and get some of the community folks who already like you, as opposed to a random stranger who don't have high stakes. They're not the person who's going to give you the most money, to give you a like or a subscribe, to sign a letter of intent that is not legally binding for them to buy later, and it just says they have interest in trying. Build a community of people who are willing to support you and prove that you are backable before you go ask someone to throw the kitchen sink at you. If you cannot do the basic items, raise your hand if it was uncomfortable for you at some point, maybe even today, to go ask someone for money for your business right now. If you are not backable, how are you going to walk up to someone and ask for everything? If you don't believe that you are already backable because so many people are showing you by giving you all of the non-monetary items you're asking for.
So here's what I love about what she's saying, guys. I mentioned the word enrollment and energy. Enrollment is the energy of being backable. If the person that you might put on your Dream 100 list at the very, very top for a sponsored capital check or a raised revenue check is not bringing to you more than just money, they don't see you as backable. Their money is not what you want. You want their network. You want who they know. You want them to rig the game in your favor. Let's make this a little less abstract for 1 minute. Some of you guys have heard me talk about why venture ecosystems are critical in the success of the founders graduating to become founder funders. There's 5 major key stakeholders in functioning venture ecosystems as I've studied this stuff over the last many years. They're always present. Universities, municipalities, Municipalities also includes the county and the state and the whatever, right? Third would be your angels and your VCs. Fourth would be your private equity. That's where your family offices are as well. And number 5 are the community leaders and community builders. Now, if you're a really, really smart founder, and I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying it doesn't require a ton of energy, how you can rig the game for yourself is by being very closely connected to all 5 of these and showing up not just as a founder, but also as a community builder yourself. Why? Because when the fundraising gods, the people that basically can channel resources your direction, which are these 5, when they choose someone, who do you think they're going to choose? Someone they think is backable, someone they think is going to make it, someone they have a relationship with, someone that gives without asking, someone that understands the power of relationships and connectivity, and has demonstrated that they are a leader worth backing and supporting. And the really, really smart founders build a community. My own VC partners did not understand why we were doing so many events in so many cities pre-COVID. They were like, what's the ROI on this? And I said, just wait. Wait till you see the return on relationship. And then as COVID hit, and then everyone was clamoring for connection, I looked like a genius after that. I've been talking about GTC long before A16Z ever brought it up. Your go-to community strategy. In order to get people to follow you, you have to be enrolling. You have to be a leader. And so I totally agree with what she's saying. Start small. You got to get connection and you got to get backability from anyone that's around you. You don't want to just go and get some big investor, but understand that big investors' money should be the least valuable thing that they bring to the table. That's not where rigging comes from. Companies still fail when they're really well funded, guys. That's not what rigging means. Rigging means it's going to be really hard for you to screw this up.
Can I cycle? Yes. Okay. So to that point, if you don't feel like you have a community already, or if you'd like to see one in action, we have demo time coming up after lunch. So once we're well fed, you can come back into this room and see 3 startup founders pitch, basically showing what their platform is. It's focused on demoing their product, not pitching you. And then you can decide, oh, did I feel moved to go do something for them? Because if you didn't, they are practicing for a reason. And if you did, then you go, oh, here's something I can learn. The most powerful version of this is in every single one of their presentations, because they're only 15 minutes long. You will find at least one thing that you love that you're like, I can learn from that, I want to take that with me. And at least one thing where you can go, I learned to not do that. I see myself in that, and I'm not going to ramble for 3 minutes about this at the opening of my pitch anymore. From there, the other thing I would like to invite you all to do is take a really deep breath. Being a venture scalable startup founder is exhausting. Kurt just told you, like in no less clear terms and at least 5 times, that you have to do all of these things in order to fundraise. You have to always be fundraising. It's your job as the CEO. You're just constantly doing things, right? It's exhausting. I would love for you to try and separate these in your mind for a moment. Separate venture scalable from being a founder. You are a founder. You are you. You are going to be a leader. You are going to be an innovator no matter what you do. So if for a moment we take venture scalable to be a model and a type of business, some of us can skip the small business phase because we will be given so much money it will accelerate us out of that. And some of us will say, actually, I need to go get revenue first. That if the only difference between this venture scalable accelerated version of the world and the version where you aren't given that much money is that you have to do more small business things. Either A, you can't get funding without the small business things because that's the way that your business model works, and some of you know it already and you need to go get revenue. Or B, you haven't found the right investor and it's going to be easier for you. You're going to get more of your company. You're going to have a higher valuation. It just makes more sense for you to be a small business first. That's okay. Being a small business is not bad. Being a small business might mean you change your name in 7 years and become Nike. That's not that bad, is it? So if that is where you're at, we're about to segue into our final section, which is on bankability. And the way that looks like for a small business versus a big business is very different. If you have a ton of money on your books versus very little money on your books, it looks different. If you have no money on your books, you are not bankable. You don't have that option at all. So if some of you walk away from this going, wait a second, the way that I'm building right now and the pace that I'm building right now makes more sense for me to view myself in a small business lens first, that's not terrible. I will remind you, there are a lot of really great ways to get acceleration that are not VCs. You can have private equity, you can have non-dilutive capital, there's grant money out there if you are in moving things forward with technology societally and you have to take on meaningful risk to do research and development. There are so many ways to get money that are not VC. If it makes sense for you to slow down for a second and be a small business, go get revenue, go get customers, go get community. It will make it that much easier to raise at a way bigger valuation. So I'll do this. 3 metrics to know, 3 things to know, to be like, okay, maybe I'm in the small business space and I want to think about bankability as a small business, as opposed to what would make me bankable as a venture backable startup that's going to 100x in the next 5 to 7 years. The first one is whether or not you have crazy competitive advantage that no one could follow. If you can communicate that now, it's easier for you to get funding. If you cannot have a defensible moat for why nobody could copy you, it's going to be hard to get investment without traction. The second thing is how aggressively you're building. Raise your hand if you think you could start right now and get a business in the next year where you are the only employee and the business makes $450K in revenue. Cool. That mentality is startup mentality. If you look up some of our biggest players, Snowflake has $2.6 billion in revenue. They have an employee count of 6,000. Their average revenue per person is $450K. If you're not playing that game, if you're not at that space where you're like, I need a team and I'm gonna need all of these team members and I'm gonna get revenue of, oh, it's not gonna be that much per person. You might be more suited to go small business first, prove out the model, build something that already works, and then pour gasoline on top of the fire instead of being like, I'm drowning my fire out because I keep pouring gasoline on something that's not lit yet. And the last item is going to be, what do you personally have the drive to do? Take a look at what you did in the last 3 months. Think very honestly and genuinely if you can do double that in the next 3 months. If you don't have that type of drive, if your why is not strong enough to make you go, and then I'm going to double that again, and then again, and then again, and then again, maybe startup founder is going to feel a little overwhelming until you can first be a small business owner that has enough revenue in your business that you don't need to answer to somebody else just so you can have money to grow the way that you want to grow. You don't have to be a venture scalable, investment-backed startup founder. You are valuable, you are capable, you are leaders, and you are innovators. Being a small business doesn't sound as sexy as being venture scalable, but it might be the right way to build for you.
The numbers of small businesses that do well into the 7 and 8 figures there's thousands of them more than there are startups that do that. So just remember that. A couple of other numbers before I get into how private equity defines bankable, because it's pretty stark, the contrast. So one thing to remember is that most of these companies that have raised lots of money out there have pitched over 200 times to find 6 or 7 that are going to invest with them. And these are qualified groups that can write these checks. So if you're nowhere near that, that's the pace you have to be on. Number 2, venture capital and angels only account for 3% of the liquidity that's out there. And that's a couple $100 billion. So do the math. We're talking about $5 trillion plus in capital that is available to move into venture. There's a difference between saying venture capital and saying capital available for venture. The second number is absolutely massive. And so it's something where if you're not fundraising fluent, you're not going to know the difference and you're not going to know, oh, I don't actually have to go to VCs. There is a whole rainbow spectrum of available capital that's out there that actually can be like a middle growth. Maybe it's a 40% a year kind of a growth type situation, which is still really aggressive. Okay, guys, so when it comes to fundability, different investors are going to have slightly different lists. I think in general, most investors will agree that we've laid out some pretty dang good stuff that we can all agree on. But I'm going to make the argument that because there's so many types of investors, that to a degree, fundability is subjective. I'm going to furthermore say that backability is very subjective because it's down to the human-to-human connection you have with somebody. They might take a flyer on the deal and say, I'll give you money because they want to, and they can. So think about that. Think about how much of an advantage that gives you to skip. It doesn't mean you get to skip actually doing the work on this stuff. It just means you give yourself a way better chance because you're getting every person that comes into contact with you knows people. Maybe they know a VC. Maybe they know an angel investor. Maybe they know somebody that came from racing. My family's obsessed with racing. If you're not into Team Red, you're not part of my family. Like, that's just how it is. So if you come to my family with something related to that, they're going to be more excited about it because they're obsessed with F1 and Ferrari, right? So these are the things that matter. Here's the deal, guys. Bankability, it's not subjective. It's objective. The vast majority of banks operate a very specific way. So let me explain it to you this way. When you go and raise money and you show up at a bank, and for those founders that think that you're cute and you want to argue with me about this, I would not have had a venture debt career for 6 years giving you funding because you have a little bit of profit. When I tell you that banks don't understand your business for the first 6 to 7 years, is what I'm saying is they might give you a little loan, but they will not roll out the red carpet for you. They're not going to take the risk. They look at your business and all they see is risk. And what they see when you've raised money, even if it's millions, is they see debt. The way they look at it is this is a bunch of money you owe other people at some later date and time. You are not bankable in their eyes. So, one of the goals that I have with the companies that we fund, and one of the things that I'm working very, very hard to do in this kind of neo-VC, neo-PE, almost venture banking model, is I want to help our founders that we work with to become bankable much more quickly. It matches my mission of creating more founder funders. Guys, you want to know the language that banks understand? Assets, pretty much. And what's an asset in this definition? Something that produces cash flow. That is the only language they understand. You show up at a bank with assets, with cash, with real estate, with anything that is producing cash or is considered an asset, that is what makes you bankable. So you have one of two options. You either build your startup as long as you can until such a time as they actually start to see you as bankable, which is usually like 8-10 years in. Or you find the kind of backer that is also willing to help you become bankable. You don't need this to be successful, to be clear. It definitely changes the risk because banks don't understand risk. To them, anything that isn't like already in your bank account, they can't, there's no imagination. This is how banks operate. They deal in, do you have assets or not? And so since you're not likely to have assets, there's ways to kind of buy them as time goes on and you start adding to your balance sheet. Another way to put this, guys, is what's your balance sheet look like? Most startups don't have a great balance sheet for a long time, and we understand why. You're prioritizing growth over stability, growth over consistency, right? But that's not how banks work. So this is the difference around whether or not you're bankable, is whether or not you have a go-to fundraise strategy and you're working with capital partners that know how to help you to become bankable. The private equity game is very different than venture. They don't lose money very often because they don't tend to fund businesses that don't produce cash flow. And when they do choose to fund a venture, they either do it in a strategic way and then they back it so that it's successful, or they're working with you to produce cash flow as quickly as possible. This is what bankability means. I don't think that every startup needs to be overly worried about this right now, but it's not something you need to be successful. I said it again for the second time. Many startups became very successful before they were ever bankable. But if you have the knowledge of this and you start to understand how this works, why would you not use this for additional rigging in your venture? Does that make sense? Okay, again, we practice this stuff every single week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We break down these subjects on Tuesdays. We do pitch kung fu on Thursdays. The main thing you should be looking to get from the sessions is feedback, not funding. Funding will come. It will not come if you don't receive feedback so that you know how to make course corrections and adjustments. The game of startups is one of constant adjustments over time. Pivoting, whatever is required to stay alive. And then we have a community online. Fusion's got a community online, both in the Middle East, Europe, not Asia just yet, but here in the United States, where we're here to answer you guys' questions. And all this stuff is free, guys. You know, we may have some really cheap memberships here in the near future, but in general, it's all free. And they're experts like Sammy that are pouring huge amounts of time in a group fashion. We're very serious about building in public. We're working on funding deals in public, which is definitely not done. And I've got a further goal of helping individuals build their portfolios in public. The majority of you guys, how many of you guys want to be an angel investor? How many of you guys, that's on your list? If you guys did not raise your hand, you don't want to be a founder funder, I guess. That's cool. That's cool. All right.
What if you already were?
You already were. I care about what you are now. But that works. That works. Josh for senator.
Yes, yes.
So on the bankability item, I just want you guys all to envision this for a second. Some of you have been fundraising for over 12 months, right? And maybe 12 months have gone by and there hasn't been a check. Imagine if you had funneled that energy into getting customers instead, into being traditionally bankable the way that a bank sees you. That you go create an asset that has cash flow, that maybe gets you a loan that is the same amount as what you would have needed anyways from an investor. You're paying interest instead of giving up equity in a company that you are planning on making worth over 100 times the valuation it was 12 months ago. That's why you were trying to get investors. And you're sitting here going, wow, this might actually be cheaper in the long run. I got to focus on getting customers, which is what I need more in the long run. Sometimes maybe it's me. Maybe I don't have the skill set or the energy and the passion to make an investor understand me. Maybe it's my industry and my market. Maybe they're like, they don't believe me because I'm making yet another social media platform. And until I have 100,000 users, they're just not going to listen to anything I say.
Timing matters greatly, guys. We didn't bring it up a lot. Timing is in the top 4 things for a success of a venture. It's the difference between a tailwind and just an upright climb in headwinds and a snowstorm and lightning and a hurricane and a tornado and all that stuff. Timing matters greatly. This is a reason why your market analysis into the business is absolutely critical. You wouldn't go buy a bunch of properties without understanding where the market's going.
I love market analysis. It's so fun. But I'm going to focus on 2 different words. They're going to feel very, very similar because so many of us have that venture scalable startup mentality. It's revenue and profit. Because if you're focused on top line revenue and you're not profitable, to a venture capitalist, you're bankable. They like you. They just want you to see that top number go higher. I don't care what you have to do for expenses. That's why I'm here. But if you're working with a bank, they care about your profitability.
To be clear, VCs almost never make you bankable. They're not going to put up their assets for your benefit. Single check writers and people that really know the game are sometimes willing to do it. VCs will not. That's not the game they're in. They will help you to rig the game if they're really, really great, but they're not going to make you bankable.
They'll give you money. That's what I'm trying to say. If you are focused on your top line revenue and you can make that number ginormous, if you can answer the question of when are you going to make your first million and the answer is less than 12 months, and how fastly are you going to grow and the answer is at least triple that, if you are looking at least 4 million in the next 2 years, you can play this venture scalable game. Minimum 4 million in the next 2 years. It's got to be 1 in 3. You got to be tripling. If that's not your game, if you're like, are you kidding me? I'm gonna make $4 million of revenue and still be in debt because I'm spending so much money to make that revenue, wouldn't it be better for me to make 1 million and keep 20% of that and make 200K for myself? Welcome to being a small business first. And if you do that, then you've got 200K as an asset in your business. Your business is now an asset, it's cash flowing, and you can go to the bank and go get money. We do not have to grow the same way.
Something else I'll mention, guys. Some of you have been chatting with me about potential investment, and some of you guys know that there is some debt and equity mix in that. Many times founders don't understand that if I'm extending credit to you, it's private. Do you understand what that means? That means it's not going to show up on tax returns, it's not going to show up on the company books, it's private credit. When credit is public, when people see that it's there, it's showing on your books, that's when it can be a challenge. When it's private, it changes the relationship you have with the individual and it changes the relationship you have to the market. I hope you guys pick up on that. Many of you probably never ever thought, well, wow, I actually can get debt that's actually advantageous. I can get debt that maybe is kept away from the company because the person that's giving it to me cares that much about my company and its success. You got to make sure you start understanding these distinctions, right? This is the game of capital, and it's fun to play.
Is that what you call that, private debt? Or private?
It can be, yeah. Usually, credit and debt are usually the same thing, not always. Yeah.
Doesn't that come with a high interest rate?
Nope, it doesn't. Yeah. It can, absolutely. High interest rate depends on your definition of where you're at. Like if you're growing at leaps and bounds and it's 15%, you know, most people say that's really high. It's not.
It's a high upfront cost of having sunk time and effort into building a relationship.
There is such a thing as high interest, but it also depends on how's it underwritten. Are you having to show a bunch of stuff you can't produce, right? What's the ease of getting into that capital? What's the relationship with the capital provider? All these nuances start to become, you know, a big thing. Like, are you having to basically do a urine sample and blood stuff because you're doing an SBA loan, right? Like, how easy is it to get into the capital relationship, and do they have a long-term aligned outcome interest as you? That will determine whether or not they're willing to help you become bankable.
Why are VCs okay with having no profitability, even?
Because they're playing a game where 3-4 of their portfolio companies make up for all the losses, all of them. That's how successful they are. Now, this doesn't mean this is how it needs to be, and it doesn't mean that this is how all VCs play the game, but that is traditionally the answer. I don't accept this answer, but that is the answer.
Well, isn't the idea partially that they're looking at the long term too?
They are.
Lose money now, make a lot of money.
And they're looking for the exit. That's when they make their money.
It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. Because if you're a venture capitalist and you can prove that you can get customers, the revenue is what matters. You can shrink expenses later on way more easily than you can grow revenue. And in particular, if you think about DoorDash bleeding and hemorrhaging credits, they're like, but afterwards you guys are stuck. Now we have a monopoly. Everyone knows about DoorDash. You want to open a new food delivery service? Try competing with us.
That sounds a lot like distribution.
And it really is. The amount of money you have to spend on distribution is insane. For most businesses out here, if you have a physical product, your product needs to be about 20% of the retail price. And the reason is because if it's more than 20%, you don't have a lot of money to go get distribution. You don't have marketing budget. How is someone going to find out about you in scale?
This is the reason why in any of the pitch sessions, anywhere, whether it's the live stuff we do on the Strip, at the Content Studio, the Venture House properties, whatever, we're always harping on founders that don't include their client acquisition strategy in their pitch. Because all of us are thinking, and I definitely know some of my partners are thinking, you're telling me you want to go burn my cash to learn how to acquire users instead of to use my cash to accelerate the users that you already know how to acquire. You see the difference?
That is the perfect note to end on.
Yes.
We are also a little bit over on time. So let me just say this. If you are still the type of person who hears all of that and you're like, I've got it in me, I'm going to be venture scalable. Sometimes the gap is finding an angel who finds you to be backable, to write you a much smaller check than you think you need to go prove out that immediate traction. You might need $5K to spend on Facebook ads. You might need $25K to go to multiple trade shows. But it might be that instead of asking for 18 months of runway, you need to ask for what will get you to the point where you can ask for 18 months of runway. Alternatively, you can go small business route, focus on revenue, go get customers. That's really beautiful and beneficial too. But if you have questions, I strongly recommend we have a Fusion community. We host calls Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'll be around at Tech Alley and we'll be at lunch so you can come ask us more questions there.
Come get a group picture real quick and welcome to Fundable versus Backable versus Bankable, guys.